And as I told you, I didn't prepare a PowerPoint because we will be looking at the autonomy model, which is online. But I have just one brief slide about the autonomy model, just to show you what I was thinking to talk about, and then you can tell me if you agree or if there are aspects that we don't need to address. And this is the PowerPoint. Wait, Bildschirmpräsentation. So, dynamic model for learner autonomy. My idea is just briefly mention something about the background of the dynamic model, how I came to the idea of designing, developing the dynamic model, and really only a couple of references, because otherwise it would be too long, but instead focus on the goal of developing the dynamic model, which was and is having a tool for assessing, self-assessing, peer assessing, and maybe evaluating autonomy. And then with the help of the model itself on the website, I will briefly say something about the structure of the model and how this model can be integrated within a pedagogical dialogue, both in self-access or settings or advising settings, and or in classroom settings. And looking at advising setting the steps for self-assessment. And then I will say something or along the discussion that we have, I will say something about why it is dynamic and why the self-assessment or the reflection process should be recursive. Would you agree with these aspects, with this outline?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then I stopped this sharing, and I also remember you, and I give you the link in the chat, that after this brief presentation, maybe 20 minutes or not more than 20 minutes, we will discuss on the aspects of the models according to the usual criteria for the discussions we had until now, which are what aspects do we think are still essential to this approach, or what other aspects are less essentials, or which aspects should we discuss, update, or maybe delete? I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, then I also send you the link in the chat of the dynamic model, but if you agree, I also share the link. But
yeah, share it, because it'll be easier to
okay.
look at it, and if you want to, you can point things out that way.
Okay, then I share it. I come back again to okay. So here's the dynamic model. It's on the website of the Self-Access Language Center, and it is, as you see, within the area dedicated to language learning advising. Background of the model. I started to work on the model or on learner autonomy about 2005, more or less, while setting up the Self-Access Center. And at the time, the Common European Framework was recent, still recent, and my aim was to try and investigate if we could describe competencies for learner autonomy. And in order to do this, I read a lot of on the literature of on learner autonomy, Oleg, bien sûr, Little, Benson, Littlewood, Oxford, and many, many others, some also in the German background, Leni Dam, of course. And I tried to identify essential components of learner autonomy, thinking of learner autonomy as a capacity, as a set of competencies, of abilities, of skills. And
Is it possible to make it bigger?
yeah.
Thank you.
Is it better now?
For me, yes.
Okay. And then I will, one of my research questions was also not only what skills, but also what strategies are appropriate or needed in order to learn a language autonomously. And is it possible or is it not possible to define levels of autonomy? It was a question which was very actual at the time. So looking at the literature on this topic and looking a lot at literature and classification of language learning strategies, I came to an operational definition of learner autonomy and then translated it into this dynamic model. The operational definition of learner autonomy was learner autonomy is a meta-construct, a complex construct, a construct of constructs, and it means the ability, the capacity to deal with different aspects of the learning process according to one's needs in different ways, in different settings and on learning situations. And the model, as you see it, entails different dimensions, a cognitive and metacognitive dimension, structuring knowledge, a motivational dimension, motivating myself, an affective dimension, dealing with my feelings, an action-oriented dimension, the central one, with the different steps of a full autonomous learning process, planning my learning, defining goals, and so on, choosing materials and methods, completing tasks, monitoring tasks, learning process, and learning progress, and evaluating. And you may recognize in these action-oriented dimension the components of Oleg's definition of learner autonomy. And but another crucial dimension of language learner autonomy, being language learning and being considering learning in a socio-cultural and constructivist perspective is cooperating. And cooperating means being able to cooperate either with other learners, with teachers, with learner advisors, and with people who may be helpful or beneficial for the learning process. And a meta dimension could be this managing my own learning, not in the meaning of being a manager of managerial capacities, but rather of being able to balance all these complex dimensions. So the model, as you see it, is on the one side, the results of working with the literature. On the other side, the results of two different validation processes with experts. And the first group of experts was the staff of the Crapelle at Nancy. I remember the first time I was in Nancy was 2006, and I'm still so grateful for these first encounters. And the second group was a staff of teachers and language learning advisors here at the Free University. And then I had another validation process using the model in a language classroom, in an autonomy fostering language classroom, and here at the Self-Access Center with in the language advising process. And last thing about the background and development, but I have already said something about the structure, is the model as you see it is the result of a really struggling process, because I knew that all these components are interdependent and strictly related, not strictly, but yeah, really related to one another in the learning process. But I didn't know how to put it. And at the time, my husband and I, just met a painter, a Japanese painter, and I once went to him with a scribble model on a worksheet and told him what I was planning to do. And I remember this, it's a personal story, but it also contributes to the model, because I remember me explaining to him what I wanted to do and what learner autonomy was. And this motivated him, a Japanese living in Berlin, having married to a Russian woman, to tell me his whole language learning biography. So it was another personal feedback that I had, okay, this model can be used in order to reflect. At the moment, the model was not so nice like it is now. So this will be, so the background of the model, the validation of the model, but as you see, I have also said something about the structure. But there is more to say about the structures, because these are only the components, and within each component we have a set of descriptors. For example, let's take motivating myself. And this is where I try to integrate different strategies for language learning and language learning process. These descriptors are more general about, for example, motivating. I want to organize my own learning autonomously, or I can motivate myself in a way that works for me. And as a learner, if I am interested, I will tell you more about the self-assessment process. If I am interested in this aspect, I can maybe click on this and see other descriptors or other statements, can-do statements. This is where the CFR comes in, that can help me to reflect. For example, I make it a bit bigger. I am aware of my motivation for learning and can reflect on this. Or I can motivate myself to learn with some example. For example, by choosing materials that interest me, or by framing my learning within a project that interests me, or by learning with others, or by rewarding myself when I succeed. Or I can remotivate myself when I notice that my initial motivation is going down. Or learners have also the possibility to complete this reflection with their own statements. I can motivate myself to learn by, or, and so on. And about this, we can discuss as a self-reflection tool. I added these categories. Yes, I can do this. I cannot do this, but I want to learn this, or this is not important for me. And the same, I don't want to go too far into details, just to explain the structure. The same is for the other components. So I can go, for example, in planning, and here you will find again some macro descriptors concerning planning, which will be evaluate my language competencies at the beginning of a learning project, or analyze my needs, or set myself goals, or plan where and when to learn, and so on. Or also going deeper, knowing what I need in order to achieve a particular goal that I have set to myself. And again, I don't want to overwhelm you, but here you have other micro descriptors. If plan a time and place for learning is relevant for your process, you can see, am I able to plan, or does my life situation allow me to plan where I want to learn? Or can I structure my time so that I have enough time in order to learn? Okay, this is more or less the structure. I have more than, I don't remember how many, but I think 113 descriptors. So I won't walk you through the whole descriptors. It would be too much, if you agree. But you see, for example, again here, for further descriptors, see completing tasks. So there are interdependence or interrelationship or links from one component to the other, because everything is related. But the idea of differentiating all these components is, yes, of course, everything has to do with everything. But if I want to progress, if I want to develop further my autonomy, or if I want to help support somebody in developing further their autonomy, maybe we need to take little steps and to focus, maybe today on motivation or tomorrow on planning or any other components. And I hope this is clear until now, so far. Okay.
Very clear.
Okay. I wanted to say something else. I go back and again, having in mind that this model is not designed to determine what my level of autonomy is. It's a qualitative approach to self-reflection and self-assessment. And this is why, I mean, this spheric figure diagram, and this is where we can start also to talk about the self-assessment process. It's up to me as a learner to decide which of these aspects is relevant to me, for me now, at the moment when I start to reflect on my learning process. So that, yeah, you can start by evaluating, you can start by cooperating if you want. So cooperating as, for example, these descriptors, I can learn with and from others, or I can decide when I want to cooperate from others, and so on. So the idea is that if I, as a learner advisor, I suggest the model for a learner struggling with his learning process, he can decide or she can decide where to start or what to focus on. And meaning that you don't have to cover all the components at once. There are very few, but I had some, maybe I can count them on two hands in these years, very few students who wanted to have a look at all the model before starting the advising process. But this is the exception, not the rule. And it's also not recommended. It would be overwhelming. So this is about the model. When we go to the self-assessment, I don't talk about what assessment for learning or assessment of learning is. If you want, we can maybe deepen it in the discussion, but the idea is this model is assessment for autonomy, not assessment of autonomy. And the idea on how to use this model is in these self-assessment guidelines. It's a bit old, but we have problems with the content management system of the university. The idea is you have, no, wait, I need to go to getting started. Well, I don't find it now. Never mind. The idea of getting started is you reflect on your, where are you now and what do you want to focus on? And then you go to the self-assessment guidelines and you see the macro descriptor, the micro descriptors, and then you have some instructions on how to reflect on these statements and how to add your own statements. And looking at the self-assessment process, this would be the first step. And it's really up to the learner in a self-directed learning setting to decide, okay, this is something that I am interested in, something that puzzles me right now. If we take, because we can also take the dynamic model in an autonomy fostering language course, this would be also, in this case, more up to the teacher to decide along their course or the teaching process, am I focusing on some particular aspects of language learning autonomy? For example, in many courses I teach, students are allowed to have to complement the homework with a self-directed learning plan. So it could be interesting to let them reflect at the beginning. I can analyze my own needs, or I can set myself realistic goals. And then after we have a particular learning plan sheet for a project. After defining their needs and the goals, they can go back to the scriptors and say, okay, while doing this learning project, I learned to set myself goals. Or the same, you can do it by choosing materials or methods and so on. So within a classroom setting, it would be more teacher-directed or teacher-suggested, and within a self-directed learning setting, it could be, of course, a suggestion from the advisors, but mainly a decision of the learner. Okay, very briefly, going back to the self-assessment steps, learner choose their focus, do this self-reflection either alone before the language advising sessions, or if they prefer in the language advising session, the advisor letting them reflect or writing down or taking the descriptors. And then there would be a third step, which in the article, in the chapter I sent to you, is comparing perspectives. So after having done the reflections with the descriptors, the pedagogical dialogue with the advisors or with the teacher or with the peers in the classroom setting would occur, and say, I'm really not able to, and I can make an example if you want, I'm really not able to set long-term goals because my life situation doesn't allow to me. I have small children. I cannot plan for, I cannot choose tasks that take me more than half an hour or things like this. So this would be the reflection from the learner, and in the pedagogical dialogue, I don't need to describe the advising session. There would be a reflection on this, and there would be then from the learner side a decision making. So I hope that more or less, in very briefly descriptions, this would be the self-assessment process. Self-assessment process that becomes an evaluation. Leni Dam and Lina Legenhausen, they gave a very nice definition of evaluation in an autonomy fostering classroom setting. They said assessment is a bit different from evaluation because evaluation integrates the different perspectives, for example, from the learners and the teachers. And the same, I think, is what I think in the advising session, that comparing perspectives help the reflection to become something more. Okay, this is very briefly the model. I also mentioned very briefly why it is, why these dynamics, why this recursivity, and maybe if I can add another personal experience. I remember it was, I think, the third time I was in Nancy. I'm sorry that I'm mentioning Nancy again, but it was the third time I was in Nancy because I was invited to assist to a journée d'études, la complexité et la didactique des langues. So at the time, I had already completed my PhD and this model, and I was working with this model. But this is where and when I realized, okay, this model had something of, even if I didn't know about complexity theory at the time, has something to do with complexity theory. Something to do, but not everything to do, because if I can make an advertisement and a teaser, the next model we would like to suggest you to discuss in the next meeting, not yet now, by Larissa Borges. She took this model and another model by Phil Benson and integrated them in another model which really integrates complexity theory, taking into account the different complex systems beyond the learner, so to say. Okay, this is more or less what I wanted to tell you about the model. I don't know if you have, I can stop the sharing, but send you the link to the model. There is something I didn't say because in the English version of the model, you have only the model and the descriptor or the descriptors in the different components. If you speak German, you will see that in the German version of the model, maybe I can briefly show it to you, in the German version of the model, there are at the end of the descriptors also some links to learning tips of that I developed for the self-access language centers, so that if people would like to, for example, make a learning plan, they can go to the Learn Tip learning plan. How can I make a learning plan? So far, do you have any questions about what I just presented to you?
Yes.
Oh, Henry.
I wonder how you differentiate between leading, intervening, and suggesting in your role as in our roles as teachers or advisors, coaches. Nonetheless, this dichotomy between the teacher and the learner. And when I think about encouraging agency or motivating developing agency for the learner, with this model, we're always the invisible hand to some degree working in the background. And you were talking a bit about like suggesting things in these dialogues or meeting with the student or the learner. And I wonder how or if you differentiate between like intervention of, no, that's a bad idea, that's a mistake, to leading a student toward a goal that you might want them to have, or lightly suggesting something casually with no consequence.
I think I see other people nodding here, because I think it's a crucial question for both for teachers and advisors. I mean, briefly, if you want to say what I think, but then I let maybe the others speak. I mean, in the language learning advising, I never intervene. I suggest, and there is this fantastic, not only this, but there are fantastic literature on how you suggest. You may, have you thought about why don't you try, and so on. Leading would be something more appropriate in a teaching context. And even this, it's difficult for a teacher to say, now you have to do this. I mean, I can't say as a teacher, if you want to get the credits, you have to do this and this and this, but not really intervening in language learning strategies. I don't know what the other would say.
Yeah, well, perhaps I can answer partly Henry's question and say that, in fact, it's all a question of the definition of the role of the advisor. How do you advise? And I would recommend reading the texts that members of the Krappel team wrote about advising and the difference between the advising role and the teacher's role. And as you said, Giovanna, it's a question of saying things like, perhaps you could try to do this if you want to improve this and that area. But it's never a question of saying, you should do this or you must do this. And there's even a difference in the roles of tutors and advisors. Advisors should listen a lot to what the learners say and try to give them indications, but never say you must do this or you must do that, or what you did is bad, yeah, you should not do this or do that. In fact, that's why the role of advisor is kind of difficult. It requires a lot of experience, in fact, and when you do that at the beginning, usually you're not a very good advisor. You need to train a lot to do that. It's very different from the role of teacher.
Then Anna, may I ask you a question in response? To what degree then, in an autonomous learning setting, are we modeling behavior that we want to see in the students? It comes to mind with the, I agree with you completely that that there are different roles, different functions. And I just end up asking myself, well, if I'm asking if I'm speaking to a learner in a particular way and leading them to think or make decisions in a particular way, then I'm modeling the behavior that I want to see in the student. So it becomes fruitfully problematic for me for this question to sort of pop up. That's why I quickly toss it back.
Denise, yeah.
Can I jump in? I have several thoughts going on, and first maybe in reaction to the intervention between you, Anne and Henry. I actually don't agree. I think that I don't see how the teacher's role is different. For me, a teacher is an advisor and a conseiller and a tutor. And I really don't see the role of a teacher who's just there saying, you have to do this and that. I have never met a teacher like that. I have never been a teacher like that. And I consider myself to be a teacher. I don't consider myself to be a conseiller. I do that role. I consult. I advise. That's part of my role as a teacher. I really don't see it as something different. And I think it comes back to Socratean dialectic. What does a good teacher do? A good teacher asks the right questions that will enable the learner to think for themselves and to find answers that will allow them to move forward and to learn. So I don't really see an added value in trying to micro divide that into separate roles, and in assigning different roles to different people within a language center. At the same time, and where I will give a certain credit to models that do that, I realize that often we have very young, very new teachers, and that learning to do all of that takes time and takes experience, which is something that Anne mentioned. And so sometimes what we tend to do is say, well, let's try and extract this part out of the role and give it to people who have less experience and so on. It's a strategy. I'm not sure it's the best one, because I think as a teacher trainer, I still want teachers to become complete teachers capable of fulfilling all those roles, which means that, yes, I have to do training on specific aspects of their roles. But I think that I don't even know how to say the word in English, les cantonner, putting them into a role where they're expected to only do one part of the role is can be frustrating for the person doing it, and can be frustrating for the people who they're consulting with. So that's a partial, it's something I wanted to say. I also had a couple of questions for Giovanna about her model more directly, because one of the things that came to me fairly clearly when you were walking us through it is that this seems to be a model of learner autonomy that is not exclusive to language learning. In fact, there are very few descriptors. There are a few, and I noticed that at the end, there are a few descriptors where you specifically mention language competencies or whatever. But basically, it seems to me that you tried to construct a model of learner autonomy that is cross or interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, whatever the right word would be. So then you seem to be nodding, so maybe you can talk about that a bit more after. And the other thought that crossed my mind when you were doing that is because it's focused on learner autonomy, it's not focused on language autonomy. And so it's very focused on, it's learner-based, it's not user-based. We're not looking at the second language speaker as a user of the second or other language. We're looking at them as learners. And we're clearly putting them into a role as a learner and not a user. And I think that can be useful at certain points. I think that's obviously when we're in a higher education setting, we consider the students there to be learners more than users. And at the same time, it seems to me that for their own personal development and their own language autonomy, long-term language autonomy, that might be a little bit counterproductive.
I absolutely agree with you with both aspects. To the first aspect, and then we can maybe go and put these comments into the Excel worksheets that we have, spreadsheet that we have. To the first questions, it could be a model for anything, for learning anything in autonomously. In fact, one of the paradox I was confronted to when developing the model was how much the degree of autonomy development has to do with the degree of language competence. And I mean, if you listen to David, for example, 2 meetings ago, within the language classroom, learner autonomy progresses with language learning competencies and language use. And in my experience, and then also looking at the learners I had in the language advising, learners can be very autonomous, but not very competent in a given language, in a given Tangle language, if they have already other experience of other languages or of having learned something else autonomously. And this is where, and this is, I think, a limitation of this model, la culture langagière, in the sense of Oleg, doesn't appear enough. And also, I think also the second question or the second remark is so important. Language use, autonomy, and autonomy as a communicator, autonomy as a language user. There is this model of Littlewood, 1996, where you have autonomy as a communicator and autonomy as a learner. And talking about strategies of autonomous language user, there is this fantastic typology of strategies by Andrew Cohn, Rebecca Oxford, and I don't remember the 2 other that worked on my strategies as language user. But I absolutely agree with you. Thank you for this. So
yeah, and I think even when we go back to the very early versions about language learning that came out of the Council of Europe, in all, one of the finalities was always independent user.
yeah,
wasn't it? And so, I mean, independence is not the only aspect of autonomy, but it's obviously an important part of it. And when we're talking about language learning, it seems to me that's the objective. And I think there's a danger sometimes when we're working on autonomy ourselves as pedagogues and as researchers. I think there's a danger in getting too caught up in the autonomy of learning aspect and getting too far away from the autonomy as a language user.
Yeah,
which is the finality if what we're involved in is language teaching and learning.
yeah. Well, thank you so
That's
much
all.
for these comments. Do we want to go? I don't think it's necessary to split into two different groups, but I can share again the link to the spreadsheet, and then maybe
You have it. Yeah.
you have it already
You put it in the
chat.
in the
yeah.
chat.
Anyway, so you can go there and then maybe put your comments on what aspects are still essential, what are less essential, and what are missing. And I think these aspects on language learning user. Martina.
There's only just one mistake. It says Lenny Dam's approach. So shall we change it into Giovanna's approach?
Yeah, then I sent you the fourth one. See you. No, I sent you a dynamic model of autonomy. No, that's a mistake. So you can correct the mistake because
because the rest of it is
empty.
blank.
It's empty.
So
It's just
you can just change it.
Yeah. I maybe I changed it and I didn't save it.
And I think right now we cannot write into it. So maybe you also need to change settings so as we can
share it.
Okay. Mitbearbeiter. Fertig. So you maybe refresh the link.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
how much time do we want to? It's 3 or 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. How much do we need? 10?
Sure.
Okay.
Giovanna, should I stop recording?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.